I was my dad's only kid. You'd think that being his daughter, he'd be protective. But that wasn't the kind of father he was. I learned early on that surviving him meant doing whatever I had to. Running wasn't an option when you were 6 years old and had nowhere to go. It was a Friday night. Those were always the worst. Once the sun went down and it was just my mom and me, the air would get heavy. We both knew it was only a matter of time before he came home. "Lily," my mom whispered, her voice trembling, "go wait in the closet. Don't come out until I tell you." My mom was a Cuban immigrant, tough, brave, and always doing her best to keep us safe. But even as a kid, I could tell that whatever restraining order meant, it didn't stop him. He always came back. When I heard his truck in the driveway, that familiar rumbling made my stomach twist. The smell of exhaust seeped in through the vents, thick and sour. And when the driver's side door slammed hard enough to shatter glass, I knew this was going to be worse than usual. I couldn't move. I never could. Fear locked me in place like I'd turned to stone. I remember staring at the floor, watching two ants drag a crumb of potato chip between them, trying to think about anything else. Then came the thud, the sound of my mom hitting the floor downstairs. She didn't scream this time. That was what scared me most. Then his voice. "Lily, baby, Daddy's home. Come out now, I ain't mad." I pressed my hands over my mouth, tears sliding silently down my cheeks. He was drunker than usual. I could tell by how uneven his steps were. And Mom, she wasn't answering him. That meant she couldn't. The stairs groaned under his weight. "Here I come, sweetheart," he called, his tone twisting between sing-song and slurred rage. "Better not be hiding this time." Mom always told me to hide somewhere new, but she never said I could run, so I waited, frozen. I remember thinking, if ghosts are real, Mom, please, do something. Then the broken step cracked, the one near the top. He was right outside my door. "Closet first," he muttered to himself. "She's always in the closet." My breath caught. I wanted to move, to run to the bathroom, but my body wouldn't listen. Then something in my head, something that didn't sound like my own voice, said, "He'll look there first. Move, Lily, now." I don't remember deciding to stand, I just did. I ran out of the closet, my little heart pounding like thunder in my chest. I reached for the doorknob, ready to bolt down the stairs and out the back door. That's when I stopped. Standing in the hallway was my mom. She looked calm, clean. No bruises, no blood, not a single mark on her. She looked peaceful. And behind her, on the floor, was my father. He wasn't moving. There was something in his back, an axe. I didn't understand it at the time, but I knew he wasn't getting up again. Mom looked down at him, then back at me. Her eyes softened, and she smiled in a way I hadn't seen in years. "It's okay, baby," she said gently. "Mama found a good hiding spot. Daddy's never gonna hurt you again." The word "okay" slid through the hallway like warm light, but it didn't behave like light. It didn't make shadows. Everything felt too perfectly still, a picture you hold your breath to keep from shaking. Even the dust hung in the air as if each speck were waiting for permission to fall. The bulb above us glowed steady and white, not the weak yellow of our real hallway light. I noticed dumb little things because noticing was safer than thinking. How the handle of the axe looked brand new, like a tool in a store nobody could afford. How my mom's hair didn't frizz under the heat of that bulb. How her feet didn't press the runner rug. No imprint, no tug. The voice in my head went quiet. The way a lifeguard's whistle goes quiet after you're already on the sand. I looked past my mom, toward my bedroom, toward the St. Barbara card tucked under my pillow, a paper soldier in a paper world, then back at the thing on the floor that used to be bigger than our whole house. Something inside me loosened the tiniest bit, but a different something tightened in its place. Relief and dread can hold hands. They did that night. "Go lie down," my mom said again, softer still. "Close your eyes. Take small breaths. I'll take care of everything else." I wanted to run to her. I wanted to say 1,000 things, and none of them were about oranges or school or prayers. But a thick, sweet drowsiness poured through me, the way sleep comes when you've cried too hard. That's what her voice felt like. Sleep you didn't earn. I stepped backward into my room without thinking. The house seemed to bend out of my way, as if the walls were tired of blocking me. In bed, I lay stiff on the coverlet, shoes still on, and stared at the ceiling. Half the popcorn texture had fallen off over the years, leaving bald patches that looked like maps of countries I'd never visit. The closest patch to my pillow looked like a fish if I tilted my head. I found that fish every night when I needed to survive until morning. Tonight the fish looked like it was swimming away from me. The saint under my pillow warmed the way a coin warms when it listens to a wish. I reached up to touch the card and felt how thin the paper was. Thin things can keep you alive if they're pressed in the right place. Downstairs, the front door gave a soft, careful groan, the sound of someone polite opening a door not built for politeness. Voices followed, lower than my father's, steady in a way that made the whole house relax. I didn't catch words. I didn't need to. The house breathed out, a long-held breath it had been saving for a night like this. I woke in gray light that could have been dawn or the hour right before it, a time that always feels like a question. For a long minute, I was sure I'd dreamed the axe, the voice, the knot shadow. But when I rolled onto my side, I saw a new knot in the wood at the threshold, a dark, perfect oval, and I knew that wasn't there before. Houses keep score in knots. The saint had wriggled out from under my pillow while I slept. I found it face down on the sheet. Someone had written a single word on the back in soft pencil, Esconde, hide. The handwriting was my mother's careful print, the way she wrote when she filled out school forms, each letter trying not to run from the one behind it. When I padded downstairs in my socks, my aunt's voice met me first, relief strained through worry. She gathered me up, kissed my hair, blessed and scolded me in the same breath for being brave and small at once. A pair of officers stood like bookends in the living room, not touching anything they didn't have to, eyes flicking to corners the way people look at a room when they're listening for what it doesn't say. They asked gentle questions and accepted smaller answers. My aunt answered most of them with a skill I would only recognize later, the skill of telling the truth in a way that leaves the danger locked behind a door no one else knows how to open. By afternoon, after statements and soft warnings and a stack of papers that tried to be taller than they were, I was in my aunt's car with a backpack that smelled like detergent and pennies, and the saint turned face out in the front pocket. We drove away while the house watched us leave. I could feel it at the back of my neck, the strange, loving surveillance of a place that had decided you were worth saving. But the story didn't end because daylight touched it. Daylight doesn't end anything. It just shows you a clearer picture of what the night wrote with a shaky hand. At my aunt's apartment, the walls were thin enough to borrow other people's lives. That first night, I heard a woman laugh on the other side of our living room like she had found a way to make laughing into a spell. A baby coughed in a way that was almost a song. Two men argued half-heartedly about a missing sock. Domestic noises layered over our silence in a way that felt like camouflage. My aunt made hot milk with sugar the way my mother had, and when I couldn't drink it, she drank it for me and kissed my forehead with lips that tasted sweet. She told me to sleep. I tried. But the new ceiling had new constellations, and none of them were the fish. I lay on my back and listened to the breathing paradox of a busy building, and under that, like the small, steady knocking of a heart under a rib, I heard it, the whisper that had learned my name. It traveled through the apartment's vents and wires, through the pipes, in from a place that didn't need doors. Lee, Lily. It wasn't scary. It wasn't even loud. It was the careful patience of a mother who has crouched behind a couch for 2 minutes too long in a game of hide and seek and is wondering if she should cough so the child will remember to find her. I turned my face toward the wall and whispered, "I hear you." The wall felt warmer than it should have. The days stacked themselves into a routine that looked, on paper, like a life moving forward. My aunt braided my hair too tight in the mornings and handed me lunches that always had one piece of fruit. We walked to a school I didn't know how to belong to yet. At dismissal, I stood under a drooping tree and waited, without knowing what I was waiting for until she came. We bought cheap bread at the bakery with the bell on the door, and sometimes my aunt slipped me a small cookie and pretended I had stolen it so I would laugh. We watched game shows with the volume too low because listening to other people win money was almost as good as winning money when it was too late to do homework and too early to be afraid of the dark. But at night, the apartment learned our names, and not just ours. It started with small things. A chair that remembered where my mother liked to sit and shifted an inch toward the window, even though she wasn't there to claim it. The bathroom mirror collected a circle of steam that looked just the size of a face exhaling close. My aunt's rosary, which she kept looped on the bedpost because she was forever halfway through a prayer, clicked twice in the middle of a quiet song from the radio when no one touched it. And always, the whisper in the vents, like a practiced breath. The whisper changed after a week. It lengthened, not louder, but clearer. The way a word you've almost learned becomes itself. I don't speak Spanish as cleanly as my mother did, not then, but I knew the shape of what I heard. Aquí, here. Where? I asked the ceiling one night, not expecting an answer and receiving one anyway. The air moved toward the hall. My aunt slept with her door open like a mother does when she's the only adult and she knows she might be called. I slid out of bed and padded toward the kitchen, past the plant my aunt watered too much, and the calendar she never changed from last July because the picture was a beach, and to change it would be to accept that there wasn't one nearby. The fridge hummed with a sound I recognized the way you recognize the cadence of a familiar prayer said in a stranger's church. The whisper became footsteps, not the heavy, inevitable kind that used to climb our stairs. These were soft and bare, the kind that shiver floorboards because they are more temperature than weight. They stopped by the table, then started again toward the balcony door like a thought that remembered a chore. I followed, not scared. Scared's different now. Scared has edges, and I didn't feel those. On the balcony, the city looked like a box of matches someone had tipped over in the dark. The rusting rail leaned into the night, the way tired people lean into door frames. The air smelled like neighbors' cilantro and far-off rain. I looked out into a space that had no place to hide and found a hiding spot anyway. Between two buildings down the block, a sliver of alley cut the night into a thin invitation. Something moved down there, a darker dark within the dark, the way a memory moves behind your eyes when you think you're done thinking. It wasn't a person. It wasn't a cat. It wasn't a shadow pretending it didn't need someone to cast it. It was a door opening in the wrong direction. I pressed my palms to the cold rail and felt the cold press back. "Mom?" I asked, knowing the voice would reach whoever was meant to hear it. The air around my cheeks warmed like someone had cupped my face. For a second, I smelled oranges so strong my mouth filled with water. A memory climbed onto the balcony, my mother's hands folding a towel that didn't need folding, the way her fingertips pressed the seam into obedience. The pressure of the rail shifted under my elbows as if someone my size had leaned there with me and then straightened up. "Not yet," the voice inside said, the same voice that had told me to move, the one with the old patience that wasn't mine. The alley waited like a held breath. The door that wasn't a door stayed open, but my feet didn't move. They knew more than I did. The next day at school, Mrs. Kelly told us to write about a time you were brave. Kids wrote about jumping off the low rocks at the quarry lake, and about riding their bikes with no hands, and about killing a giant roach in the bathroom because their mom had screamed from the hallway. I wrote about oranges. I wrote about a saint card with a cloak that could hold 100 scared kids and still have room for 100 more. I wrote about the sound a house makes when it decides to love you. I didn't read it out loud because you can't read certain magics out loud without changing them. But when I turned mine in, Mrs. Kelly looked at my face a long time and nodded like she had counted every ladder rung I'd climbed and found the count to be true. On Friday, it had to be a Friday. Some stories insist on their favorite days. The building fire alarm woke up at 2:19 a.m. It started as a half-dream in my ear, a far siren that wasn't far at all, then became the high, desperate bleat of a frightened animal no one knew how to soothe. Red light pulsed in the hall like a heartbeat that had lost its mind. My aunt was already at my door, hair braided crooked in sleep, eyes wide in the way that means the body is awake while the brain still runs. "Shoes," she said, and I obeyed because we had learned each other's useful orders. People spilled into the stairwell wearing inside-out shirts and one sock and the wrong jacket, holding children that clung like questions. We moved together down the narrow concrete tunnel, one hand on the rail, one hand on the person you didn't plan to hold when you went to bed. The alarm screamed itself hoarse. The building didn't smell like smoke. It smelled like fear, which has its own smell. Penny sweet and plastic and the ghost of hot metal. On the second-floor landing, we stopped. Not because anyone told us to, because we felt something. The alarm cut off too suddenly to be a fix. Someone had pulled a plug like you pull a plug on a noisy toy. In the silence that followed, the building made a noise that wasn't a building noise. It was deep. It came up from the basement like a laugh that forgot to be kind. The air turned cool. Not cold. Cold you know how to fight. Cool like the breath from a mouth that doesn't need breathing. The whisper came through the stairwell, and for once I wasn't the only one who heard it. The woman who laughed through the walls made the sign of the cross absent-mindedly on her chest and whispered, "Virgencita." The arguing men shut up mid-sentence and held hands without noticing. The older gentleman from 3D, who never looked up from his crossword when he passed anyone in the hall, lifted his head slowly, like someone calling his name had snuck up behind him. "Aquí," said the whisper, not from the basement, from all the corners at once. The emergency light strobed a soft white. The walls looked too new for a second, a trick of the pulse. New paint, no scuff marks, handles polished. I saw my mother standing 3 steps above me and 3 steps below at the same time, and something inside me clicked like a puzzle piece that had been trying to pretend it didn't belong to anything. She moved her hand, once, and the crowd breathed with her. Calm dropped onto our shoulders like the light jacket you forgot you were carrying. "It's a false alarm," the building manager called from somewhere. "Go back up, it's all fine. Someone pulled a..." He stopped. Silence has edges. You can cut yourself on them. The cool air warmed 1/2 degree. The whisper exhaled in relief. We went back to our apartments, a procession of sheep that didn't know whether to be annoyed or grateful. My aunt locked the door, and then unlocked it, and then locked it again because her hands wanted to do something. She laughed at herself. Her laugh was thinner than usual. We sat on the couch in our socks and looked at the door like it was a friend who sometimes forgot to knock. After a while, my aunt said we should try to sleep. We tried. Sleep tried back. I stood in the kitchen for water and saw the saint card where I'd left it, tucked in the corner of the frame that held my school picture. The room swayed very gently, like a boat hearing about the wind before the wind gets there. On the back of the card, the pencil word had smudged and thickened from all the times I'd worried it with my thumb. Esconde. I pressed my nail into the paper until the point went soft. Something knocked in the wall. 2 short taps, like a person politely rapping on wood to keep a rhythm. It wasn't the pipes. It wasn't the neighbor. It was an answer to a question I hadn't asked yet. "What do I do?" I asked the saint, my mom, the air. It was a child's question, which is to say, it was exactly the right one. The fridge hummed again. Yes. The whisper in the vents flowed toward the balcony. I slid the door open and stepped out. The night was thinner after alarms, like you've peeled off a skin you didn't know you were wearing. Down on the street, a cat leaped onto a dumpster lid and looked at the moon like it had a complaint. Across from our building, the narrow alley that had woken my attention before was wider this time, or perhaps the dark was. It wasn't only a door opening wrong now, it was two doors, one inside the other. The space between them had a color that wasn't a color the way a feeling isn't a sound. My mother stood there in the hinge between doors, hands on either frame as if steadying them so I could see. Behind her, deeper in the colorless color, something moved. It was tall enough to need to duck under city wires if it had been on the street. It was wrong in a way that made my teeth ache. All the little hairs on my arms stood up like grass meeting a storm. I couldn't look all the way at it, not because I was afraid. Fear is small and specific. This was larger. I couldn't look because part of me knew that if I gave it my full attention, it would notice and it would want to turn. My mother turned her head so I couldn't see her mouth, but I felt her speak. No. The word wasn't for me. She was talking to whatever lived in there. It stopped moving like a person who's been told to pause for a picture and doesn't know what face to make. Then it receded the way a bad smell recedes. Still there, just farther away for now. I exhaled so hard my aunt's plant moved. My mom smiled at that like I had done something brave without meaning to. She took her hands off the wrong doors, and the alley was an alley again. A car rolled by playing a song that used to be new and wasn't anymore. The dashboard light made the driver's face look like a person in a movie. The spell of the moment folded itself and put itself away, but I knew where it lived now. The hiding spot wasn't only a safe place, it was a place from which to push back. Days got louder. That's how I remember it. The whisper didn't stop, but it changed its job, from calling to teaching. It came when I set my feet wrong on a staircase I didn't know would complain and told me where to put my weight. It came when the bathroom fan made a sound like a thin animal caught in a pipe and showed me which switch to avoid for a week. It came when my aunt bent to pick up a dropped fork and the cupboard above her swung open on a loose screw. The whisper stiffened my aunt's spine and made her stand half a second early, and the cupboard door whiffed her hair instead of her skull. She shivered and told the air gracias before she even knew why. And then there were the pictures. In the living room, above the TV, my aunt hung a row of frames that had other people's families in them because she hadn't gotten around to replacing the stock photos with ours. All those women with white teeth and pastel sweaters laughed at children who weren't theirs, while a fake dog pretended to jump into a fat pile of leaves that had never been raked. One Sunday afternoon, while my aunt napped with her hand on her chest, like a saint of the light chores, I watched those strangers pretend to love each other and felt a sadness that was not mine pass through my chest, like a bird deciding on a tree. When the sadness left, the pictures smiled different, not a trick of light. The way the frames sat, the angle, changed as if a careful thumb had pressed each one where it wanted to live. One leaned a whisper to the left, one a whisper to the right, and in the sliver spaces between pretend faces, I saw us, not pictures, reflections, like the glass had decided to stop doing one job and try another. Me and my mom and my aunt at the table, with oranges and a towel and a saint card, like the glass had caught a memory and decided to display it. The change taught me something I would need later. Sometimes the world will tilt a degree to show you the hidden image. Your job is to notice. Your life will depend on what you do with the noticing. School tried to return to an old normal. The counselor, a woman with earrings shaped like found leaves, asked me into a small room that smelled like dry markers and told me about feelings as if they were books I could borrow from a library and then return without overdue fines. She was kind. I didn't know how to tell her about the knot doors and the voice that moved my aunt out of the way of cupboard corners. She gave me a stress ball shaped like a strawberry. I squeezed it until my palm smelt like plastic fruit, and I could almost feel my mother's hand over mine, guiding how much pressure to apply so it would not split. At night, the building remembered Friday and held its breath for a while. It wasn't the kind of holding that meant fear. It was the kind that means anticipation. You can tell the difference if you are very still and honest with yourself. I was both. On a Friday night in late October, when the wind got cruel for the first time that year and the sky did its gray tricks early, the elevator in our building stopped between floors. That was normal. It was old and moody. The normal part was that it groaned and then sighed and then decided. The not normal part was the way the stairwell answered. Concrete doesn't echo like wood, but that night the stairs had echoes anyway. Footsteps showed up that weren't footsteps. It was like hearing a childhood in a different apartment. The push of a palm against paint, the skitter of a toy in a corner, the half-sobbed laughter of a secret kept too well. People kept using the stairs like nothing was wrong because nothing was wrong if you didn't listen. From my bed, I felt the building lean. Not a lot. Enough to convince the part of my body that had learned the center of gravity the way you learn a lullaby. I sat up. My aunt was at work, night shift covering for a friend, so I was alone except for the whisper and whatever made it. The balcony door clicked once like a throat clearing, a second click. I got up. Outside, the city's October breathed frosting onto the metal rail. Somewhere far, someone hammered something stubborn into something that would not yield, the same blow over and over until the hammer remembered how to rest. The alley waited without pretending not to. The knot doors were closed, but I could see their seams, the way you can see the way a magician hides a dove if you let your eyes go soft enough for long enough. There was a noise below me that didn't fit, the soft scrape of rubber soles dragging as someone took a step they didn't want to take. I looked down and saw a shape I recognized even when the face was mostly brim, baseball cap, shoulders that used to be bigger, jacket I didn't know but knew the posture that had taught it how to hang. My stomach dropped. My throat went tight. For a second, the old and the new collided inside me and I was 6 again and 3 times my age. He stood in the mouth of the alley, peering up at the building numbers, squinting the way you squint at a menu you know you can't afford. He took off the cap and crushed it in his fist and put it back on again, an old nervous habit that had survived 1,000 nights. He swayed the way men sway when they've poured coins into their blood and want to believe they bought courage. He was thinner. He was smaller. He was here. I would love to tell you I screamed, that I ran to call my aunt and the police and the landlord and the sky, that I did the list of right things. But the whisper said one word, Esconde, and everything in me obeyed, like that word was a rope, and I was on the safe side of its knot. I stepped backward into the dark of our living room and didn't turn on the light because I didn't have to see him to know where he was headed. He looked up at balconies, and for half a second, his eyes landed on me like a fly landing on a glass of water, and he looked away because there was no reason to stare at an empty balcony with curtains that didn't move. He went inside. I didn't hear the building door because the building had decided not to remember it. I did hear the gull-wing slam of the stairwell, the way cheap metal lifts its shoulders when it's asked to bear more than weight. The footsteps started up, not heavy this time, measured. The measured footsteps of a man doing a part he thinks will let him keep living. The measured footsteps that used to come up our old stairs, masquerading as patience. My mother didn't say move this time. She said listen. I backed into the kitchen. The saint on the frame looked at me the way a mother looks at a child she has decided to trust with a small, important errand. I set the saint on the table, face up so it could watch the living room. I opened the drawer that held rubber bands and batteries and a key to nothing. I didn't know what I needed. I knew where it would be when I knew. My hand closed around a small flashlight, not the object, the idea. I turned it over. The batteries were in. I clicked it on. Off. On. The beam was thin and hard like a thought you can't get rid of. He was on the 4th floor landing. We lived on 3. He didn't know that yet because he was counting slowly, making a ceremony of numbers so they wouldn't betray him by totaling up to the wrong decision. The building breathed in around his breath and made everything slow so I could watch each piece do its job. I stepped to the balcony door and slid it open a whisper. He hit the third-floor landing. He took a breath that tried to sound like, "Here we go," and sounded like, "I am afraid." He turned into our hallway. The whisper in the vents turned clear as glass. No. Not this door. He knocked on 3A. A man with the voice of 2 morning coffees answered and told him to go away using words that were boring and correct. He knocked on 3B. The arguing men opened as a unit and closed as a unit. He knocked on 3C, our number. He didn't knock like a threat. He knocked like a salesman doing his best not to starve. The politeness of it hurt more than the old banging. "Please," he said, not loud. "Not for me, for the door." "Lily? Anna? Please." I didn't move. I breathed. Across our living room, the pictures that had once held borrowed families tilted their glass spines. In the reflection, I saw my mother at the door, hand on the knob, head tilted in the soft way she held it when she wanted to see the person under the behavior. She didn't open. She didn't need to. The chain on the door lay against wood like a necklace that had outlived a party. He pressed his palm to the door and whispered something I will not repeat because names can be made into spells, and not every spell ought to live. The wood grain under his skin darkened. Not moisture. Memory. The door remembered what we'd been through and shook itself like a dog shaking off water. He flinched back as if the door had been hot. He stared at his palm and saw nothing there. The whisper in the vents tisked once, like a grandmother who loves you anyway. "Please," he said again. It was almost not a word now. A sound. An old sound you make when you've been lost so long, even the wrong house looks like a way out. The balcony air tightened around me. I raised the flashlight and pointed the beam at the ceiling. 3 short bursts. 1 long. 3 short. I didn't know why I did that. I didn't know what I was spelling. But the building answered. Lights in the hall flickered in the same pattern. Once, twice, and then steadied. He flinched. He looked up. He whispered a prayer that wasn't one he'd learned in any church I knew. He put his forehead against the door. Behind him, at the far end of the hall where the exit sign burned its fake green, something stepped from the stairwell. It was tall in a way that was a memory of tall, not height. It was the wrong color that wasn't a color again. It was made of the seam between the knot doors. It was the shape that had moved when my mother steadied the frame. It was polite in its stillness the way deep water is polite before it learns your name. He didn't see it. He was too busy trying to press his apology into wood. I saw it, and the part of me that had learned to outweight fear recognized something uglier, something that believes it is owed. The thing stood behind him without sound, and the hallway got longer in that trickway. Hallways get longer when you are far from help. "No," my mother said so gently it broke me. "Not this one." The thing paused. There is etiquette, even over there. Even strange hungers can be trained to heal. It turned its head, if head is the word, and let me feel where its face would have been if faces were part of its plan. It looked past the door, past me into a room where it had no permission, and then the saint, on the table, did something unremarkable, which is how you know a miracle is about to arrive. It slid an inch to the left, paper on wood, a whisper that belonged to this world. The thing bowed, not to me, to the instruction. And then it receded the way a tide recedes, marking everything it leaves so you'll remember it was there. My father, he's still that. The stubborn biology of him refusing to release the word stepped back from the door. He wiped his face with both hands. He looked smaller than the knob. "Okay," he said, and the syllables were so ordinary they squeezed tears out of me. "Okay." He put the cap back on. Wrong. Brim askew. He stood there a second like a boy who has to pretend not to cry in front of the whole school. He turned, slow. He didn't look down the hallway toward the stairwell because some instructions are written in climate, not words. He walked away fast. The building remembered the measure of his steps, the stutter at the left foot where the shoe wants to drag and the knee wants to argue. The stairwell door sighed in a way I will be grateful for until I die. The whisper softened enough to carry me back to the couch. I sat. I cried in the quiet way kids learn when they've been told too many times to be quiet. I cried for the girl with the fish on her ceiling, and for the girl with the balcony, and for the man in the hall, and for the thing that bowed, and for my mother, who lived where she could love me without being seen by men who mistake visibility for the right to take. When my aunt came home at dawn, she smelled like coffee and victory. She put her bag down more carefully than usual because she felt what I had felt, how the air was thinner in a way that made new rooms in the day. She knelt in front of me and took my cheeks in her hands and said, "You saw him." Not a question. I nodded. "He left," I said, the way you say the end of a story when you are practicing the end and want to hear what it sounds like in the open air. She nodded back. "He will try to come back again," she said, because my aunt didn't believe in lies that wore the costume of comfort. "But he will forget the address more each time. We will help him forget." She kissed my forehead. "And if he can't forget, someone else will help him remember to go somewhere else." We lived. That's what I want you to know. We lived in the and between relief and vigilance. Nights didn't stop having edges. We got better at padding them with shared food and low music and the paper saint that turned its head to watch the door. I learned to read the building's size the way my aunt could read the weather and the way pigeons collected in the afternoon. I learned where the wrong doors tended to appear, in alleys and mirrors after 3 in the morning, in the gap between the top of the fridge and the ceiling when the light there stuttered. I learned you can tell a house thank you by wiping down its baseboards and fixing the hinge that squeaks, because sometimes squeaks are cries for attention, and sometimes they're warnings and it's rude not to ask which. I also learned the city had more than one hiding spot, that it had hundreds, thousands, that every building that had ever made room for a person who needed room kept a small connection open, like a phone line you don't hang up fully because you want to hear the person breathing while you wash dishes. The city was alive with these lines. On the bus, when the driver took a corner slow because the corner remembered a bicycle and a winter without salt, I felt the whole route exhale. In the bodega, when the owner casually set aside a bruised mango for a kid who had counted wrong on purpose, the ceiling fan stuttered and then found its rhythm. The hiding spots learned each other's names and started to send messages across the narrow lungs of walls. And then the building burned. Not ours. The one across the street, the one with the alley that opened wrong on cool evenings. It happened on a night in November when the sky itself seemed oiled, when smoke could sneak out and be mistaken for weather. It started small, in a 5th-floor kitchen where 2 pans badly paired decided to argue. The argument became heat, which became a bad idea, which became a story that left the walls and tried to leave the building too. Sirens like old grief, red on brick. People on the sidewalk with faces your blood recognizes even if your eyes don't. We stood on our balcony and watched the city do its old dance of hose and ladder and shouted names. My aunt prayed out loud with the calm wrath of someone who plans to take it up with God later, whether or not God was home. I hung on the rail and counted windows, counted breaths, counted the number of times a firefighter disappeared into a mouth of smoke and reappeared with an arm around a stranger, and a shout that meant the stranger would go on having a future. On the 5th floor, a woman held a child in her arms at the window. The child screamed the way children scream when they are practicing for the first time what it means to be terrified on purpose. The woman didn't scream. Her mouth was a firm line, the mouth of a person who kept a family alive by remembering budgets and birthdays and where the light bulbs were. I knew that mouth. I knew that kind of woman. I lifted my hand, silly and useless, and the woman lifted hers back, a piece of glass between us and a city. The ladder truck lurched and corrected. The firefighter on the top looked up and then down and then up again, calculating like a man at the top of a story problem. The math was not going to math. The ladder would be a breath short. It would if the building didn't decide otherwise. I felt it, under my feet, in my teeth. The entire street leaned a degree you would swear was an illusion if the liquid in the bottles behind the bodega counter hadn't tilted left. The ladder met the windowsill. The woman didn't wait for instructions. She put the child into the firefighter's arms with the confidence of a person who knows she has given everyone she loves the safest part of herself and will do it again. The firefighter found center and backed down, knees remembering weight, lungs saying a rude thing to the night. The woman stayed. Of course she did. There is always one more person. There is always one more thing to grab. A picture, a name, a breath. She vanished into the room. The smoke grew its own hands and tried to clap us into silence. The alley across from us opened a seam, not the wrong doors, not yet. The seam quivered. It was waiting for instructions. My mother stepped onto the balcony. Not mine, not the one with our rust and our plant that couldn't decide if it wanted to be alive. The other balcony, the one that wasn't there on the 5th floor, the one that became there in the moment we needed it. She stood as if the building had added her like a line item to the budget, as if it didn't require miracles to attach a balcony where there was none. No spectacle, no trumpet. She reached into the room, into the smoke, into the arithmetic of disaster, and pulled. The woman came out like she had always planned to walk that direction. My mother held her elbow in a way that said, "Here, I will be here as long as this step takes." The ladder met them because the ladder had decided to be longer tonight, and the firefighter took the woman from my mother, and the whole block remembered how to breathe. My mother turned her head toward me. Distance is different in some equations. She was in my face at the same time she was on the 5th floor. She was laughing the way people laugh when their bodies are exhausted and delighted. She said in the voice that lives where blood goes to bless itself, "See? The hiding spot is big." I laughed through tears because it was either that or pass out. My aunt gripped my shoulder with a squeeze that said, "You see it too, and I won't make you prove it." The alley sealed itself. The wrong doors stayed closed. The fire learned modesty and let itself be instructed by water and men who know how to grab and go. The woman who had been rescued sobbed into the firefighter's ridiculous coat, the kind of coat that looks like it could take a punch from a god and keep to-do lists in its pocket. The child hiccuped. The neighborhood clapped with hands, then with elbows when hands got tired, then with eyes when arms got tired too. The next day, our block smelled like wet smoke, the melancholy of a birthday cake blown out for the last time. People brought food to the people with blackened windows in the way of neighborhoods that remember their neighborhoods. I helped carry trays. The rescued child touched my sleeve with a small, sticky hand and left a mark shaped like the letter C. I kept the shirt and refused to wash it because sometimes you get to build a shrine out of laundry. That night, my father called. We hadn't given him our number. Numbers can find you when they've been taught your name too well. My aunt answered and put it on speaker because she wanted to be the wall between me and whatever voice came through the wire. He said my name the way you say a word when you're testing if it belongs to you anymore. He said he was leaving town. He said he was sorry in a way that wasn't a lie or a request, just a fact he wanted to put down on a table and back away from. He said he had dreamed about a door that wouldn't open, and behind the door, a woman who didn't need it to open to come into the room anyway. My aunt didn't say good or finally or about time. She said, drive safe. She said, don't call at night. Call in the afternoon when children are less likely to hear the phone. He said, okay. He said, okay again, like he was begging permission of the word. He hung up. I went to the balcony because that's what I do, when the line between worlds feels thin and I need a rail to hold. The night swung in small arcs like a pendulum learning to count. The alley whispered, not danger, not invitation, just hello, just the acknowledgement living things owe each other when they share a street. I closed my eyes and my mother was there. Not a vision, not a ghost story. She was the feeling of a kiss being learned by a cheek. She was the weight of a hand on a head soaked with bathwater. She was the voice that tells you to hide and later tells you how to build a door of your own. Why an axe? I asked her. Finally daring to ask the question the first night had left hot and unaskable in my throat. We never had one. Her answer came with the orange peel smell that means ready. You build a thing when you need it, she said. The world keeps old tools in the walls. Sometimes it keeps new ones where hands can reach. Sometimes it keeps the idea of a tool, and if you believe it hard enough, it fills in the shape. That simple? I asked. A little accusation I didn't mean. That hard, she corrected, smiling into my scalp like fingers. You have to know the shape. You have to know what it's for. You have to be certain you won't use it wrong. I thought of the thing in the hall that bowed. I thought of the burning building's ladder. I thought of the neighbor's peonies taking root in oil-killed ground. I thought of the Saint card, of pencil smudges, of the soft scrape of paper on wood. I thought of the wrong doors waiting for instruction in back alleys and above fridges and in the seam between grief and habit. How do I know? I asked. The oldest question. The one under all the others. You will feel the room breathe in, she said, and you will tell it when to breathe out. I slept. I did. For the first time since oranges on a plate, the darkness was only darkness. The building stood guard the way a big sister does, even when she has a fever. My aunt snored a little. It sounded like a lullaby with a stuck note. I dreamed of ladders that would always be a breath longer than anyone needed, and of fire alarms that sounded like laughter, and of a door that only opened to hands that had never struck anything smaller than themselves. In the morning, I found something new under our front mat. Not a letter, not a threat. A small wooden wedge, the kind you shove under a door to hold it open. It was smooth with years of hands. It was warm in the way wood gets when it has done its job for a long time and is resting between shifts. On the wedge, someone had burned a symbol, a triangle with a dot in the middle and a line along one side. I didn't know what it meant, but my blood did. I picked it up and the whisper in the vent said good. I used the wedge every day that week. When my aunt lugged groceries up 3 flights and needed the door to be a friend, the wedge did its job. When a neighbor's toddler learned the pleasure of slamming doors, the wedge laughed and held the line. When a cold wind slid down the hallway and tried to rattle the wood into a worry, the wedge said, "Not today." Each time, the symbol warmed a little more until it felt like it could have been carved into my palm. The last Friday in November, I woke to the city holding its breath again. Not fear, the pause before a song starts. I sat up and the Saint card was already in my hand. My mother's voice moved through the apartment in a way that wasn't sound. "Here," she said, and I knew she didn't mean the kitchen. I knew she didn't mean the balcony. She meant the place she had shown me the night of the fire and the night of the hallway and all the nights of oranges. I dressed warm and told my aunt I'd be back before the street learned our names again. She looked at me like a woman who knows she cannot protect you from your life, but can walk you to its door and wait with a sandwich. She gave me a scarf. She gave me a kiss. She gave me the quiet kind of blessing she saves for afternoons that don't know what they are. I walked to our old house. The block was the same and different in the way places are when you leave and they keep living. A new mailbox, a new crack in the sidewalk with weeds arguing their case, the same kids dragging the same sticks along the same fence, practicing the music they would later pretend not to love. Our house had a new curtain in the living room window, a floral that looked like it needed someone to scold it into behaving. Someone had painted the porch steps the wrong shade of blue and then given up after the second step, as if the paint itself had sighed and told them to go inside. It was a house that remembered too much and tried anyway. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and felt the floorboard under the old runner hello me through my shoes. The door didn't know my knock and said so with manners. the wood tone of a new owner. A woman answered with the kind of face people make when they are expecting a package and get a stranger instead. She looked me over the way a house looks you over, checking for nails, for weight, for whether your breath will match its breath. "I used to live here," I said, not an explanation, a permission request. I wanted to see it. She considered. People in houses understand certain requests. She opened the door wider. "Don't touch the thermostat," she warned in the tone of a person who remembered too many winters, "and wipe your feet." I wiped. Inside, the rooms were smaller and bigger at once. Smaller because the illusions of childhood had gone. Bigger because the fear that had stretched them into a funhouse mirror had released its grip. The house exhaled hard enough to dust a baseboard. The new couch wore a throw blanket like a cardigan. The new rug apologized for the old scratch in the floor with a pattern of little blue flowers. The kitchen laughed at me over the backs of new chairs. "Can I check something upstairs?" I asked, and the woman said, "Sure, kid," without asking why. Houses do that. They tell people what to say when the person at the door belongs. On the stairs, the second step from the bottom squeaked low, the fifth sulked, the ninth cracked a little, old friends practicing old conversations. The hall had the wrong bulb again, thankfully, the scrim of dust that makes human light look like it has weight. The knot by my bedroom door winked its closed eye. I stepped into the room and stood by the vent. I crouched and set my ear to the grill. For a long time, there was only the sound of heat trying to become a wind. I almost stood up. Then the whisper slipped through with the faintest sweetness of oranges. "Esconde," it said, and I laughed because I had half expected a brand new word and realized perfection is learning the lessons you're already being taught until they teach you themselves. "I know," I whispered into the vent, "but show me anyway." The screw in the top left of the grill turned a quarter turn by itself, a polite little shrug. I pressed a finger to the grill and it lifted like a lid that had been waiting for the right hand. Behind it wasn't ducks and dust. Behind it was the paper Saint and my mother's breath and the hinge of the wrong doors when they belonged to the right side and a wooden wedge warm with other people's hands and the memory of an axe handle you only need to hold in your mind to feel its weight. Behind it was a note. Real paper. Real pencil. Folded twice. I unfolded it with the ceremony paper deserves. The handwriting was my mother's careful block. "If you found this, it means we are still good at this. Stay small when you have to. Grow fast when you can. Teach the house its name by using it. And Lily, when the other footsteps come, they will, don't let them choose the room. Ask the question first. Are you coming in peace? Or are you coming to be taken?" I pressed the paper to my face and breathed the last molecules of her skin cells off it. A gross and holy thing. The house moaned once, happy. I tucked the note into my pocket. I slid the grill back into place, pressed the corner until the screw pretended to bite. I stood and turned and kissed the air in the center of the hall like I was kissing her cheek. When I went downstairs, the woman had made tea without knowing why. She handed me a chipped mug with a string that read a brand name like an apology. "You grew up here?" she asked, because it's polite to talk in finished houses when strangers show up with soft eyes. "For a while," I said, which is the truest timeline when time behaves like weather. "It's a good house." She nodded like she knew about houses that keep you alive. "It makes a lot of noises," she offered, almost sorry. "Listen to them," I said. "They're mostly friendly." On my way out, I ran a hand along the banister. It hummed the way wood hums when it's tired of being splinter and would rather be skin. On the porch, I looked at the yard where the ruts used to be and saw a thin line of stubborn grass drawing a green smile through gravel's mouth. I waved at it. It waved back by not falling over in the wind. I walked home a different way, through the alley where the knot doors opened when the city needed to be bigger than itself. In daylight, it was only dumpsters and the scribbles you can't read and the smell of bread from the next block. The seam was still there in the bricks if you looked with the eyes inside your eyes. I blinked at it a long moment. It blinked back, courteous. At the mouth of the alley, a woman in a yellow coat paused and looked at me like we were both in on a joke no one else on the street would ever understand. She tilted her head toward the seam. "Do you see?" I nodded. "I do." She smiled. "Good." Then she said out loud in an accent that felt like my mother's home and not the country that put stamps on her name, "Cuídala," as if she were addressing the alley itself. Take care of her. The alley breathed in and then out. Wind shuffled trash into a new order that resembled the letter of a language I didn't know yet. I took the saint from my pocket and touched it to the brick, my own little miracle of paper on stone. The brick warmed and held the heat like a hand. That night in our apartment, I lay in bed and listened to the building practice being a ship. I could tell which neighbors had learned about the hiding spot and which still thought doors only do one job. I could feel the wrong doors like cattails in a marsh. Innocent unless you grab the wrong end. The wedge lived under our mat and did its quiet heroics. The note lived in my backpack against my math book. My aunt slept with the confidence of a person who had made the city her sister. My mother's laugh moved through our vent like the scent of oranges in a season that couldn't afford them. I slept. And because I slept, I dreamed. And because I dreamed, I asked the question my mother told me to ask when the other footsteps came. In the dream, footsteps that weren't my father's and weren't the things and weren't the firefighter's footsteps and weren't mine climbed a set of stairs that wasn't from any building I knew. The steps were made of pictures. The banister was a line of names. The walls were lined with paper saints in coats of every color. The footsteps stopped at my door and did not knock. They waited. They were patient. They were learning our language. "Are you coming in peace?" I asked them through the door, "or are you coming to be taken?" They answered by breathing in. Not an answer, a test. I breathed out. I breathed out long and slow and named the rooms as I breathed. Kitchen, hall, bedroom, closet, balcony, hiding spot. I named the wedge and the saint and the note and the seam. I named the ladder and the fire and the woman in the window. I named oranges and towels and pencil and the smell a house makes when it decides your life matters. When I ran out of names, I breathed out one more time from somewhere behind my belly button, a place the wrong doors cannot copy. The footsteps breathed out with me. They warmed. They moved away. I woke up with my face wet and my mouth tasting like the middle of an orange, sweet with a bit of bitter because the pith is part of the fruit. I sat up. The saint lay on my chest. The wedge hummed under the mat. The apartment looked like it had always looked and would always look, alive with the responsibilities of a place that has become a person that holds other people. This is not the kind of story that ends with a neat bow. The other footsteps will come again. That's the nature of footsteps. The hiding spots will open again because that's the nature of mercy. The city will learn more tricks. The wrong doors will practice better manners. The wedge will earn a nick in its side that looks like a smile. The saint will smudge until you can barely read the pencil, but the graphite will have already rewritten the wood grain of our table, and that will be enough. And me, what will I do? The same thing my mother did, I think. The same thing my aunt does without saints or oranges. I will find the children who need hiding, and I will teach their houses how to breathe. Maybe I'll be a woman in a yellow coat one day, pausing at the mouth of an alley to tell it to be kind. Maybe I'll be the person on a ladder or the one holding the bottom steady. Maybe I'll be the voice in a vent saying a single word that saves a life because it buys 1 second, 1 inch, 1 breath. But if you hear someone at your door on a Friday night and the footsteps aren't sure whether they want to be taken or to do harm, and your house whispers your name so gently you almost mistake it for remembering, what are you going to say back?